So I'm here today with Maria Isabel Rosario from JALSA, the Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action. Maria, how are you today?
I am good, Jordan. How are you?
I'm doing well. So for everyone here listening, JALSA is a nonprofit dedicated to promoting civil rights, protecting civil liberties, and achieving social, economic, and racial justice. Maria, can you tell me a little bit about JALSA's legal and legislative approaches to creating change?
JALSA uses a fairly straightforward structure in terms of how it goes about its organizing and how it goes about using legal elements of the way we approach our partnerships and our coalitions. It's a relational organizing approach. So essentially what JALSA does is it focuses heavily on building relationships with our coalition partners, really digging in and finding out what the core issues are here at the state level that need to be tackled, and then mapping out a pathway for the best way to go about that. So the legal part of it comes in when we have our legal expert, our staff attorney comes in and works with our executive director and our legislative director on those strategies. But essentially from the ground up, it really begins with a relationship and goes from there in terms of finding out what our coalition partners want and need, and how JALSA can best fit with those needs.
And from the sound of things, what you're talking about, legal experts, et cetera, your leadership structure is pretty robust, right? Including your board, a leadership team, and a number of committees and coalitions.
Mhm.
What sorts of topics do these committees and coalitions tackle?
We have a number of the six primary areas of focus that all sort of intersect on various levels. So anything from immigration, economic justice, education equity, housing equity, and healthcare reform, along with environmental justice and equity. So those are the areas that JALSA really tries to focus on, build our coalitions around those issues, and that's where our board really tries to center us around those specific areas. But they all tie back to the basic premise of Jewish social justice, and how we can use our values as a Jewish organization to really impact change statewide by focusing on these key issue areas.
Have you had any big wins in those areas?
Yes, we have. I
Tell
think
me
that
about them. Love to hear.
oh, I think the November midterms are probably the best example of that.
Mm.
You will see that JALSA has had two really big wins this year. We saw two of the ballot initiatives that JALSA has been working on for a number of years pass at the state level. The first and probably the biggest being what we call the Fair Share Amendment. It is an actual amendment to the Massachusetts state constitution that calls for a 4% surtax on those who make $1 million. So if you
Wow.
are $1 million earner in the state of Massachusetts and you work in the state of Massachusetts and make that $1 million, then you are subject to this surtax. And essentially that money will be going to much needed infrastructure for the state. I'm sure living where you live, adjacent to Massachusetts, you've heard a lot about the MBTA. It's
Yep.
issues that we've had
Take it
with
all
our
the time. Yep.
system. So that there's also a line of money that will be going to that as well. Along with education, we can't do enough to upgrade our systems here in the state, and be sort of a beacon and a model for other states as well. So I think that the money that has been earmarked for that is also going to allow us to, at the state level, make some much needed upgrades and changes to our education system.
And
And then
just
the
for, oh, sorry,
no,
go ahead.
go ahead.
So
Go
just
ahead.
for everyone who is not aware that MBTA is a commuter rail. Well, it's a rail service that runs from
Yes.
Providence, Rhode Island, for example, where I live, to Boston,
Yes.
Massachusetts.
So
Oh,
it's our mass transit system. So, things, the way we get around the city, anywhere from buses to trains, and as you mentioned, the commuter rail system, which also, needs a big boost and upgrade in terms of its infrastructure. Our second win was in the area of immigrant rights and justice. So JALSA had been working in partnership with a coalition for many, many moons on the Work and Family Mobility Act. So it was a Driving Families Forward coalition, sort of shepherding this piece of legislation called Work and Family Mobility Act, which essentially allows undocumented immigrants to have access to a legal driver's license. Why this matters is because we have a lot of our undocumented neighbors driving or needing to get to work or other opportunities, whether they be family opportunities, picking up your kids from a soccer game, or going to the hospital. How do you do this safely if you don't have a driver's license, or if, like many, you're walking a mile or a half a mile or a quarter of a mile to wait for an MBTA bus or to get to an MBTA or mass transit station. Having access to a driver's license also makes it much safer for those of us who are actual citizens and legally documented immigrants, because if there's an accident, everybody is covered in terms of knowing who an individual is. And insurance can be handled a lot easier. So it was one of those common sense initiatives that was very common sense to those of us who understood where it was coming from, but not so common to those who opposed it. And thankfully, because of the hard work of a lot of folks who are adjacent to me in JALSA and our partners in terms of colleagues, this got done. And we finally have it on the books as of the first of the year. So folks can go out and get their driver's license, whether they are documented or not.
well, congratulations. Those are both awesome initiatives.
Mhm.
Excited for those to be in effect. So when this interview is published, right now we're recording this towards the beginning of January, but when it's published, it'll be close to the week of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a day on which we celebrate a person who was a prominent leader in the U.S. civil rights movement. And one reason we wanted to highlight JALSA this month is because of the project we're funding at JALSA, the Jews of Color Leadership Engagement Initiative, which is dedicated to building leadership opportunities for Jews of color to engage in Jewish social justice work in Massachusetts. Can you tell us, Maria, what the process of dreaming up this JOC Leadership Engagement Initiative looked like?
Well, Cindy Rowe is one of those leaders that her brilliance can't really be quantified in terms of the way she approaches, looking at the need and looking at what can really enhance JALSA's work and
Can you
what
tell us who Cindy Rowe is, real quick, for anyone listening?
Cindy Cindy is our executive director. So she is, the person at the heart of all of this, and everything sort of branches out and is around her. JALSA is one of those unique places that doesn't necessarily have a typical sort of historic framework for a hierarchy. We really work collaboratively with each other and in coalition with each other individuals. So she really, it's her brainchild, this whole thing, and she saw that there was a definite need to start looking at problems beyond sort of the typical Jewish social justice model. So, you have a group of people come together and sit in a room, and I'm sure a bunch of emails get sent, and everybody comes up with a solution. Cindy saw that now is the time to really say, well, we're doing this work for specific communities. We're doing this work and it's impacting specific types of people. Why are we not hearing from that specific population in everything that we do? And how do we find them? Um, So honestly, the project, in terms of the way the process came about, was how do we look at this in a way that will allow us to transform JALSA and its work from within? And then also, how can we do this in such a way that we are centering the stories of the people we are going to be working in concert with, and centering those stories in such a way that will allow Jews of color to speak to the 6 issue areas that I spoke about earlier through the lens of not only their Jewish values, but also through the lens of who they are as an individual. We all, as people of color, have these various intersections, and our Judaism lives sort of at the center of that, the center of that hub where those intersections come together. So, how do we do this where we can really bring people in and allow them to look at these issues and speak with our coalition partners and be a part of the process of coming up with solutions, coming up with ideas, coming up with ways to approach these issues as coalition partners are coming up with these ideas for legislation, or are shepherding pieces of legislation that have already been put forth? How do we bring in the right people and the most motivated people to be able to do that? And what are their stories?
So now that the project is in process, you've talked about you basically talked about leveraging those voices, right?
Mhm.
Bringing in the stories of Jews of color, bringing in the voices, bringing in the expertise of Jews of color. Um, Now that we've been in process of working on this project for 2 years, what's the strategy that's developed around leveraging those voices and expertise to address the state and federal policy issues? Those 6 different categories you mentioned before.
Mhm. So Cindy and I, in our ongoing conversations about how this would work, came up with a sort of outline that would allow JALSA to, during a legislative session, so from January to the summer, and then in those weeks in between, how can JALSA put together program opportunities that will allow the JOC community here in Massachusetts, but also outside of Massachusetts, because there has been a lot of interest from folks outside of the state? How can we bring them up to speed and keep them informed about what JALSA is working on? What are the ways in which we can do that, it allows for people to come together, it allows for people to hear from us, and it also allows people to bring their voice to the table, so to speak. So we mapped out several different roundtable events during the course of a year, along with maybe 2 workshop opportunities that would be learning opportunities, say a lunch and learn, for people to come and find out about, this is a specific piece of legislation that our legislative team is working on with this coalition partner. And we want you to find out, we want you to hear about this directly from them. We want you to learn about what the nuts and bolts are of this, where we are in the process, and what you can do to help us move this forward. So whether it be a phone call to a legislator, whether it be, writing letters, helping to phone bank, whatever it is that we have in terms of an opportunity for you to get involved, we want to share that with you. So it's looked like hosting 2 roundtables so far, and now looking at where do we go from here in terms of, as we begin this new legislative session, what are the issues that JALSA is really going to be tackling, and how do we want to inform our sort of JOC base that we are building?
Yes, so tell me, as you start looking forward, how do you think this project could transform JALSA's work? And how could the impact of this projects like this, uh, transform the Jewish progressive movement as a whole, more broadly?
I think in the past, what's happened is that a lot of organizations like JALSA and others have really done work in silence silence almost. So if you know about JALSA, you know about JALSA. If you don't know
Right,
about
yeah.
JALSA, then you don't know about JALSA. And I think that that is something that Cindy knows has to change, and I firmly believe must change. We can no longer afford, in terms of where we are now, politically, socially, to work in silos. We have to be able to be as transparent as possible and create the types of opportunities that, even if it's just a handful of people, brings that handful of invested stakeholders in close enough so that they can have the information that they need, and then be able to take that information and sort of trickle it out to their networks. So that's one part of what it looks like: transparency, and really creating opportunities for people to engage in the work in ways that they haven't been able to do so before. So taking your name brand, taking those wins that we talked about earlier, and saying to people, this is who we are, this is what we have accomplished, and here's how we would like you to come in and get involved. And here are the things that we're working on now that we truly need your input on. Because if we don't hear from all of the members of our community, we're never going to know how we could have approached a situation differently. So if you're working on immigrant justice, you're not going to know how you could approach a situation regarding equity and justice for the immigrant community unless you hear from people who are either in it or adjacent to it, or have some sort of lived experience that they can bring to the conversations that you're having. I always like to say to Cindy and to others I speak to, imagine you're in a room and you have a legislator in that room. You've got an imam, you've got a pastor, a priest, and a rabbi. And each
Mhm.
person talks about it from their spiritual experience and from the standpoint of the values of their specific tradition. But then imagine you say, well, here's a Jew of color that can speak to what this white rabbi just said. And not only can they speak to it, they've either lived it or they know someone who has. And I think that that is the power of what JALSA wants to do. And that is what is ultimately going to be able to transform the type of liberation movements that we as JOC are looking for, is that opportunity to be able to say, well, yes, my rabbi just said this, but here's where I come from. Here's my experience. And here's how my Jewish values really connect to the experiences that I've had as a person of color, and really connect to the type of change that I would like to see happen in area housing authorities, or for people who are dealing with healthcare issues, or for people who are dealing with any of the myriad of things that we know are the core policy issues of this era. What is the value added? Imagine the value added of having that extra voice in the room to be able to really bring that home and allow this person who is a legislator who may or may not have a lived experience to be able to understand it within a different context. So I hope that's not too much of a roundabout answer to it.
Well, I
But
think
I
it's
think,
definitely, important for our movement to be able to address those blind spots in a lot of ways that have traditionally been there. So definitely, I think we're with it. Um, Now, if someone's watched this interview and been like, wow, JALSA's so cool. I live in Boston or, Western Mass or whatever. They say, man, I really want to get involved with JALSA.
mhm.
Where can they find
Well, you can find us on the web, www.jalsa.org. So that's my website pitch. And
you?
you can also find us via email. A lot of the times we have found, and I say sort of the collective we at JALSA, that we connect with people when we receive an email. Hey,
Mm.
someone at my synagogue told me that you're doing voter rights work. How do I get involved? Like, where do I get my postcard packet? That's one of the things that JALSA does regularly, is engage in voter rights work. And we do things where we send postcards to voter suppressed areas in the South with national coalition partners. And that's sort of on a national level. But the easiest way to do it would be to send an email to either Cindy at cindy.jalsa.org, or to our legislative director, David Albright. Pretty simple, David at jalsa.org as well. And that's the way to really, get involved and engage, just by saying, I heard about this. Um, I heard this podcast, or I read this interview, and I'd really like to find out more. Or engage us on our website. The new site should be launching soon, and I think that there's going to be some exciting opportunities for folks to engage that way as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Maria.
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I love talking about the work.
All right. Bye now.